Recording. Okay, great. And while we await our quorum to arrive, I will be going through some opening remarks about how we're running the meeting, this hybrid meeting tonight. Welcome everybody to the May 23rd, 2023 Long Range Planning Committee meeting, hybrid meeting. The agenda site is 3108 Columbia Pike and the draft historic and cultural resources plan update. We'll be holding this hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation, is legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7, 2022. We do have some members of the LRPC who will be participating remotely. Actually, we have both. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, on the county's events calendar, and on email notifications sent to LRPC email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use that. Planning Commission is joining virtually. If anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect to us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you hold on. Turn off the sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, again, please turn off your video feed. And I'll address when it's appropriate to turn it back on again in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active to serve two purposes. It's for participants who need technical assistance and for other attendees to pose brief clarifying questions to a larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. Teams should not be used for discussion or any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of the specific agenda item, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. There will be two periods for public comment at this meeting, which will follow after LRPC discussion of each agenda item. All the public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. I'd also like to remind everyone in the room to speak up slowly and clearly and to the microphones that are up above here or the ceiling, which will allow the virtual participants to hear all of us. In addition, if you'd like to share your screen, please request permission from the LRPC chair prior to doing so. For planning commissioners, if planning commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams. I, as well as a staff member on the video feeds, will be monitoring video feeds that are on as an indicator who would like to speak. And I apologize in advance if I don't notice right away. So definitely keep that hand up, keep your face video on. And if you need to jump in and say something, I'll be ignoring you. I'm not ignoring you, it's just I didn't look up, so you can do that. If we have any commission members who joined us by phone today, well, has anybody joined by phone? Any commission members? Don't hear anybody, so I don't think so. If we're members of the public who'd like to provide feedback and comments tonight, unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LRPC agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the LRPC chair's discretion after the committee discussion has concluded. We will be having an opportunity tonight and we'll exercise that discretion. You will be called on at the end of the LRPC discussion to speak on each of tonight's agenda items. Speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening, at a maximum of 2 minutes. I will call for speakers after each agenda item, and I will ask the staff to let me know if we have any virtual attendees who'd like to provide comment. Staff will acknowledge speakers on the Teams chat. Please indicate in the chat that you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located in your meeting command bar. Moderator does not have the ability to unmute you, but you will be muted when your time is concluded. As an alternative, public comment is available and be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC's webpage. And lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded, is being recorded, and will be posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. And with that, the preliminaries are out of the way. We are still waiting for one more commissioner, but while we're here, we can go around and introduce ourselves. It's not particularly substantive, so I think we can do that. I'm Jim Lantelmi, and I'm chairing this LRPC tonight.
My name is Anika Chaudhary, LRPC coordinator, and also presenting for 30 minutes.
Elizabeth Guerin, Planning Commission.
Lauren Ferris, the principal planner with the Historic Preservation Program. Good evening, everyone. I'm Cynthia Lachaise Torres, and I'm the manager of the Historic Preservation Program.
Good evening, I'm Brett Bear with Facilities Design and Construction at DES.
I'm Valerie Mason. I'm with DES as well. I'm the project manager for 3108 Columbia Pike.
And online, we have people. We could start off with Commissioner Weir.
Daniel Weir, Planning Commission.
Thank you. Jen.
Hi, good evening. Jennifer Smith with the Planning Division.
And Margaret.
Margaret Rhodes with the Planning Division.
Very good. Our other staff online. And we have one more person in person who's walked in. That is
Leah Starley from Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Sarley. With that, we now have a quorum and we can start with, and we get the introductions out of the way. So why don't we start with the presentation 3108 Columbia Pike. Ms. Jaggery, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the LRPC. My name is Anika Chaudhary with the Department of Community Housing Development, and I'm here with Valerie Maslin with the Department of Environmental Services. This evening, staff will provide a joint presentation for 3108 Columbia Pike, which will consist of the site overview and background of the proposed project, followed by the general land use plan amendment and rezoning requests that are anticipated to be heard at the June Planning Commission. I would also like to note that this will be an informational brief. That being said, I will hand it over to Valerie.
Good evening, everyone. To provide some background, the county purchased a 3108 Columbia Pike property back in March of 2022. Its intent is to use that property to relocate the Columbia Pike Branch Library from the Arlington Career Center to the new property. Now, this is identified in the CIP to be relocated starting fiscal year 2028. Therefore, in the interim time, there can be another use for the property. Now, during this time, the Arlington Career Center will also be redeveloping the property and will need overflow parking for construction workers and staff. Therefore, the 3108 Columbia Pike property can be utilized for their overflow parking. So to give you an overview of what the site currently looks like, there's a 3-story building that is currently vacant and 63 parking spaces. Now, surrounding the property to the south, there's townhouses. To the west, there's a car dealership. And to the east, there's a Montessori school and Port City Hall. Now, to talk a little bit more about what this interim use will look like, there's a 3-step process. The first step would be to demo the existing 3-story building. Now, this would help with the interim use and with the future use as well. Second step would be to expand the parking from the existing 63 parking spaces to 92 parking spaces. And thirdly, we would lease the property to Arlington Public Schools for them to use as overflow parking. Now, on the screen, we have two different drawings. One of them is of the existing site in its current condition, and the second one is of the proposed interim use. Now, if we look at the existing plan, on the north side, you'll see Columbia Pike, and there's two entryways from Columbia Pike to the property. So one of the entryways is used actually as an entryway, and the other one is an exit. It's one way in and one way out. There's also a 3-story building towards the north part of the property, and towards the south, you'll see 63 parking spaces. Now, on the proposed side, again, Columbia Pike is to the north of the property, and we'll be keeping the two entryways into the property as is. One of them, again, for entry, and the other one for exiting, and they will continue to be one way in and one way out. We'll also provide control access to the property. And then along Columbia Pike, there is proposed vegetative strip and ADA parking spaces as well. Now, the remainder of the site will expand from the existing 63 parking spaces to 92 parking spaces. Along with this, we'll relocate and add lighting as needed. We still are undergoing a lighting study to clearly identify where the light will need to be placed. And we're also attempting to keep all the existing trees on the site and add additional landscape as necessary. Now that we've talked about the interim use, I want to talk about what the future use will look like. The intent is to relocate Columbia Pike Library, and it's identifying the CAP to start in fiscal year 2028. Along with that, there's also the possibility of a mixed-use development for county board priorities, such as affordable housing. Now, prior to the design and construction of this future use, community engagement for the long-term vision will commence. And now I'll pass it back to Anika.
Thank you, Valerie. So in terms of the GLUP amendment and rezoning, the requests are as follows. In order to facilitate the creation of a publicly owned parking lot at 3108 Columbia Pike and support the short-term and long-term vision for the area, this is a request for a general land use plan amendment to the public facility map and table to identify this site for a proposed publicly owned parking lot as a feature shown in the county's comprehensive plan, and a rezoning from R5 and C2 to S3A. The short-term and long-term vision for the area is to build the career center and relocate the library at this location. Therefore, allowing for a publicly owned parking would help facilitate construction and reduce parking impacts on the surrounding. The current GLUB designation for the site is service commercial and is within the Columbia Pike Special Revitalization District and under public ownership. The proposed interim use of the property as a publicly owned parking lot prior to its long-term future use as a new Columbia Pike library is consistent with the current GLUB. However, given the county ownership of the parcel and the county's intention to provide interim parking serving the APS Career Center campus during its redevelopment, a GLUB amendment to amend the GLUB public facility map and associated table to identify this site as a publicly owned parking lot will make this a feature shown in the county's comprehensive plan as needed to fulfill the public facility state code requirements, and further reinforce the county ownership beyond the crosshatch and clarify the proposed use. The proposed parking lot use, which will be the future county library, is recommended to be added under the public parking category as part of the county's comprehensive. Staff expects the category would be changed to the public library category at the appropriate future time when the long-term use is. In addition, the final details of the long-term future vision for the site will be further determined through a separate community engagement process with potential for additional changes to the GLUB, public facility map and table, as well as the zoning for the subject site to support the future uses. This future public facility at this location would not conflict with the form-based code guidance for this site, which is for mixed-use development up to 6 stories. So therefore, a public facility could be part of a mixed development feature. In addition to the proposed club amendment, an associated rezoning is proposed to reclassify the site from R5 and C2 to S3A. In accordance with the zoning ordinance, the existing C2 district requires a special use permit for proposed parking, commercial parking use, and the existing R5 district does not allow for commercial. A rezoning is requested to facilitate creation of a parking lot for APS staff and contractors during the Career Center construction, as the S3A district is an appropriate district to accomplish the near-term objectives for a county-owned operated surface parking area, which may become available for public use once the Career Center needs are met. In addition, while the S3A district has multiple functions, both for parkland and public facilities, including schools and libraries, it can also support a publicly owned parking lot, which is allowed via a use permit, thus conducive for the. Once the future vision of the site is established, the S3A district will be evaluated and confirmed as the preferred zoning, and the form-based code redevelopment is possible with S3A zoning. Furthermore, as a use standard for commercial parking requires a 25-foot separation between the proposed surface parking lot and adjacent R districts, a 25-foot no parking area has been striped, no parking signage adjacent to the houses to be to maintain this. Although the surrounding buildings are being used as a school, it is still tied back to the R districts and are not being used as dwellings. As shown here, the Columbia Pike Special Revitalization Form-Based Code identifies the site on the Town Center Regulating Plan as a combination of Main Street in red and local in blue frontage types. When we think about redevelopment under the form-based code, the Town Center Regulating Plan calls for mixed use up to 6 stories, transitioning down to 4 stories as we come south to future 11th Street, and realignment of South Highland Street next to the site between 11th Street and Columbia Pike, which will shift west in the future. These are all factors that will go into the planning for the. In terms of the anticipated timeline for the club amendment and rezoning, DES has notified adjacent property owners of the anticipated project, as well as affected engagement groups, including Columbia Pike Presidents Group and the Pike Partnership. Legal notices have also been sent out this week to adjacent properties. The proposed club amendment and rezoning will be heard for final consideration by the Planning Commission next week and the County Board next month, and the associated use permit request for commercial parking is anticipated to come forward concurrently for County Board consideration in June as well. These approvals will facilitate the final steps needed to advance to construction and are necessary to support the site's conversion to a publicly owned parking area. Construction of temporary parking improvements is anticipated sometime this fall, and projected completion of these improvements and the start of the Career Center construction is expected in early. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. This is now before the committee for discussion. I'd like to get off, but I'll take chair's privilege of asking a couple questions. Confirm we mentioned this before the meeting, but the building is in fact empty. There's no tenant in it right now. It's not being used. Is that
That's correct.
Thank you. It is being used for parking right now, as we mentioned earlier, but that's informally by the neighborhood and other people up and down the corridor.
That's correct.
Okay. In the plan that you put forward, talking about essentially keeping the way it's being done now, just tearing down the building and replacing that with parking. Do we still need to have both curb cuts operational that was done because a bank building was here and that was the drive-through circulation. Is it at all possible, or can we explore closing down one of those curb cuts?
So if one of the curb cuts were closed down, we would have to expand the other one because they're only wide enough for one way in and one way out. It could be explored, but at this point, the design doesn't show it that way.
Right, but I think it would be worth exploring because one wider curb cut is better than two not too far away from each other. So I personally would recommend that be explored. It shouldn't be that expensive to do or to have happen. Commissioner Gearing?
Yeah, I concur. You know, whether or not you want to explore that now, I think it'd be useful just to get that on the table to explore for the final development. We've heard that a lot over the last couple of years, reducing the number of curb cuts is safer for pedestrians and cyclists.
Thank you. I will hold up other questions. Are there other questions, Commissioner Gearing?
Thanks. This was a really nice presentation. Thank you. You answered a lot of the questions I was having as I went through it. So just to clarify, you're proposing to retain trees, but add trees even at this interim stage. Then my next two and last questions sort of focus on, is there anything that we're doing now, this interim stage, that would preclude doing something that's planned for the long term?
No.
You could like paving over more of it, you know, anything that we have to undo to make the library there.
Obviously, in order to build the library,
Yeah.
some of the parking that's being used in interim would have to be removed
Of course.
to do that, but we're trying to do the design as flexible as possible in order to allow us to have more flexibility for the future design. But it's also very much unknown exactly how that will be done. So it's hard to predict what will have to get redone and what will stay in place.
That's helpful. And you'd said S3A works with the form-based code.
That's correct.
Okay, and then the last thing is, I know there's reference to a forthcoming community engagement process. Is the OG involved now, even with this interim design?
We also presented to them in an informational base.
Any concerns from them?
Similar things from what you all have mentioned for us to consider during design.
Remarkably few things then, so you've done a great job. All right, thanks.
Commissioner-
Are we full on discussion?
Yeah, full discussion. Yeah.
So did I
By the
miss
way,
the
I
meeting?
want to know Commissioner Boulevard has now joined us too in person.
Did I miss a meeting, or is this the first meeting that first we're hearing of this? Okay, so I have several layers of questions. So the first question is, why are we tearing down the building?
The existing building doesn't have a function for the county. It has a lot of, it's not currently accessible. A lot of things would have to be upgraded. There's asbestos in the building. There's just different things that the best way to deal with it is to tear it down and redevelop instead of having the building reused for another purpose.
Okay, but none of those are new, right? Like existing buildings are existing buildings, and that's what they have. They have these old things. They have subpar design. That's fundamentally what they are. But the embodied energy in this building, it's probably, I'm guessing, a steel and concrete structure. You know, that's a big deal to tear it down, right? Let alone what's already there. So I would really urge staff to look at these structures and think, yeah, it's not as sexy to start with the tabula rasa, but you know, it's also kind of fun, you know, if you approach it with a little bit of a, let's have a good time with this and kind of tackle it. So that's the first comment that I have. Like, why aren't we seriously looking at retaining, if not the guts of the building, you know, as much as we can, repurposing, reusing, you know, designing around it, adding a shell onto it. There's a lot of design possibilities that could be really fun, actually.
So there was a study conducted to
Mhm.
analyze what would be the most cost-effective way, and it was decided that tearing it down would be one way. But when the building is torn down, about 80% of the material are actually recycled. All the concrete and steel does get recycled. So from that perspective, we're trying to be as environmentally.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so again, that's why I was wondering if there were studies that sort of looked at the building, you know, and sort of what options work. All right, so level 2. So you've torn down the building, you've moved everything. Why pave it? Why not just leave the dirt, put a bunch of plants in there, not expensive trees or anything, but just create a rain garden sort of, effect. And then do a curbing around it. I mean, we're sort of scheduling quite a bit of money to pave it and resurface it and all this other stuff. Why don't we, instead of resurfacing it, we put the money into just greening it, and again, embodied energy, cost of construction, and then the recycle and reusing of plants is fairly straightforward.
Part of the reason that we're doing this interim use is to help the career center redevelopment. At the height of their construction, they're expecting anywhere between 200 to 300 workers. So this would actually help alleviate the parking in the community.
Right. Okay. Yeah, with that, again, I wish we had a way to preserve the structure. I don't know what the works department thinks the value is. I'm guessing not very valuable structure as far as work analysis goes. You guys want to?
We haven't done a walkthrough. Being honest, we would love the opportunity to do that and collaborate with DES if there's any salvage potential for certain design elements, but into the building.
Because it is a cute little building, and it does sort of have an era sort of aesthetic to it. And it's not the worst building I've ever seen. It's actually kind of a lovely little building. Yeah, so I think those are my comments. I think, yeah, the curb Commissioner Lantelmi mentioned, and I think that would be a good thing. But yeah, I would love to see, I know that parking is a big deal, but I'd love to sort of, see if we can at least do a little bit of an island, maybe reduce the parking as much as we can to create a little, garden in there just to get the water filtering through.
We're actually looking at potentially expanding some of the landscape that isn't shown in this to meet for stormwater requirements, but that's still under the sign of looking at it. So you will most likely see more greenery than what is currently shown.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks. It seems like you guys did your homework, so I appreciate that very much. Again, I would really encourage for you to take a second look at keeping the structure and, elements of the structure that could potentially be reused. And the libraries go in there, so that's kind of cool. So can't wait to see that come to our look at some fun. Thanks. Sorry.
Commissioner Weir. You're on mute.
Good evening, everyone. I want to add my I'm going to share. I don't really have any comments on that haven't been shared or aren't going to be shared in a moment, but I will share the some of the highlights from the OG meeting. I think that one of the biggest highlights has already been covered, and that's the consolidation of the curb cuts. There was a really strong interest in seeing the curb cuts consolidated. I think the across the board agreement with Commissioner Lantelmi that one double-sized curb cut is going to be in nearly all instances preferable to two single-sized curb cuts. I think related, there was a very significant concern. Just about anyone who said anything raised this concern or agreed with it, that the OG has been very insistent that anytime any applicant touches a sidewalk, that the sidewalk be at the end of the project have been brought up to form-based code spec, and that if there is any daylight between the form-based code spec for the sidewalk and the existing condition, it has been subject to the multimodal project, but that does not mean that it meets form-based code spec insofar as there was an existing building there and building line. So I don't know if there is daylight. I don't know whether or not there is. I think there was a number of people at OG who thought that it was too narrow, that it was 2 feet too narrow, and that it would need to be expanded at this point rather than waiting for future work that may or may not be done as projected in the CIP for 2028 or 2026. I can't remember which. But again, just to reiterate, the OG's insistence has always been that anytime an applicant touches a sidewalk, that the project be delivered with the sidewalk fully in accord with form-based code spec. There was a really strong sense from the OG that any use permit include a condition or some other shall type statement that the location become a library. And I think that there was consistent suspicion that merely being included in the APS CIP was sufficient or satisfactory, especially since the alternative would be likely that it remains a parking lot for the indefinite future should the CIP not move forward as planned. There was concern that nothing be done in this layout that would foreclose upon progress on 11th Street. 11th Street, that 11th Street between Glebe and Highland is a critical portion of the master transportation plan and the Columbia Pike form-based code, and basically the county cannot be in a position of allowing development to proceed in a way that that entertains the possibility of foreclosing upon the deliverance of 11th Street, especially when that property is publicly owned, is county owned. Then there was concern that the no parking portions of the parking lot in the southeast corner, that they should not remain paved if they are if they are in fact going to be blocked off as no parking. That some use is going to be preferable to even if it's just mulch is going to be preferable to unavailable no parking paved spots. And then there was a concern about the preservation of existing trees along the southernmost portion of the area, especially in light of the fact that work will need to be done on the wall that separates the southern the wall that separates the southern border of the property from Axonite Village will need to be rebuilt. I believe that is everything, but I am happy to take any questions should there be any.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that I associate myself individually with all of the concerns that were raised by the OG. Sorry, now I am done.
Okay, I will note for the record that Commissioner Steinberger has joined us remotely. So we have one more commissioner here. Wrapping this up, I do also want to raise, this is more for the zoning going forward. First, I agree with the OG's concerns about this eventual use, in fact, being a library, which I think has been for years, has been desired by this community. Very good reason. Wanting to move it off the APS site and move it onto Columbia Pike is a great planning move. It would be wonderful for this community and for the redevelopment of Columbia Pike, but it has to happen. I'm a little disturbed that we don't have any plans right now to start that community process to what this property will be after the interim use is done. It takes a long time to go through community processes. The Career Center it's like 10 years now. We should really be starting now the outreach to the community as to what can happen here to lock in the library and see what other uses are there. The question for staff, if it does end up being as one of the possible options, affordable housing on this site, does S3A zoning allow that?
In terms of S3A, I believe so. There is a certain but we feel that is the most appropriate zoning.
So that would not preclude that as a potential additional use beyond the library.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. But I would strongly recommend that we start that process sooner rather than later.
Oh, and Ms. Chowdhury, could you confirm that when it comes to planning commission, because I think that will come up. We often do want S3A, but yes, the goal is to get as many community goals in on the site.
Right.
It'd be nice to do this once, yeah.
Yes, Jennifer.
Jen,
Sorry,
yeah, Ms. Smith.
Yeah, hi, good evening. It may have been a little hard to hear. I think the question was, could we accommodate housing with the S3A zoning? Did I
Yes,
hear
that's
that question correct?
Yes, correct.
Correct. S3A does not allow housing, but we can complete or construct a mixed-use development under form-based code, which would allow housing with the underlying zoning of S3A. So we would have to be doing that with the form-based code. It's not an allowable use just with S3A as the only zoning mechanism.
But with the form-based code, it would be allowable. I want to just
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. I don't care how it's done, as long as it's allowed, and we'd have to go through additional processes. Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions?
Quick follow-up question.
Yeah, sure, Commissioner Sarli.
Are we cogitating doing this without the form-based code? Is that?
No,
We're not, I didn't hear that, right?
no. No, we just confirmed it, that it is,
Okay.
it will be. Do we have any public speakers on this? We have one public speaker. Great. Who will that be?
Jim Schulman?
Mr. Schulman, are you ready to speak for 2 minutes? We're gonna
Yes.
but just hold on, not quite yet. Okay, we're gonna go to 2 minutes. Okay, you can start now.
Yeah, I shouldn't need a full 2 minutes. I just want to agree with everything I heard from Commissioner Sarli about this project. I'm an architect, and I am all in favor of adaptive reuse, and I actually find it disturbing that there would be a proposal to tear down a 3-story building when the final use, ultimate use of the project is not yet determined. And I think preserving an existing structure, maybe not the whole building, but the structure of the building until that final use is determined is important, because just providing some additional parking spaces does not in any way match the value that is embodied in that building for climate purposes, if nothing else. And so that while I do understand the need for extra parking, it's outrageous to me that not only would the Arlington County government have to lease land to APS, but they'd be providing parking for a construction purpose that's a private matter. And so this is really, really backwards planning, and I urge you to consider otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I just want to confirm this will be coming before the Planning Commission. It's been advertised already, is that correct? Okay, so it'll be coming before PC. When will that be? Do we have a date yet?
May 31st.
May 3rd.
Oh, Wednesday. Wednesday.
May 31st meeting. Great. And then the county board. Okay, thank you. With that, I think we can close 3108 item and move on to our second agenda item on historic and cultural resources plan update, that draft. You have staff presentation, and I can turn it over to you. Introduce yourselves again, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am Cynthia LaChase Torres, and I lead the county's Historic Preservation Program. We're very excited to present our draft Historic and Cultural Resources Plan to you this evening, and formerly known as the Historic Preservation Master Plan. The original plan was an element, continues to be an element of the county's comprehensive plan, and that was approved by the county board back in 2006. So the version we will be discussing this evening marks the first update to that original plan. And if it's okay with Chairman Lantelmi, we would prefer to allow commissioners to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we can still save time towards the end, or would you rather we save?
Just get through it.
Okay, okay.
We too often go down rabbit holes that way, and like get that done.
Fair enough. Okay. So in terms of background, the planning process for this update has been ongoing since 2020, and we began it really at the start of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. On the left of the slide, We've outlined some of the major milestones that have been completed each year, including a range of public engagement and a considerable amount of time last year addressing initial input from interdepartmental county staff as well as county leadership. We released the current draft plan for public review and comment in mid-April of this year. As you can see in the right column, we are in the midst of our public engagement through the spring and this summer. We already have attended 8 pop-up events and hosted a community open house. We have several more pop-ups planned throughout the spring and summer. Our online feedback questionnaire is now active, and if you have not filled it out yet, you should definitely do that after this meeting. We would welcome all of your feedback on that online questionnaire. And as part of our engagement, we also will be releasing some exciting digital content, including an interactive story map about the plan, as well as additional videos in our Cultural Heritage Spotlight series. Later in the year, we expect to bring a revised plan draft through some county commission reviews, including a return visit to the Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board, plus presentations to the full Planning Commission and the County Board. We anticipate bringing the new plan to the County Board for adoption this fall. A separate implementation framework document is also in progress and will be finalized with the County Manager's Office after plan adoption. Our next slide is our fancier version of our timeline that shows the various types of engagement and the levels of engagement that we've done. And so this is here to reiterate a lot of the work that has already happened to date. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about some of the accomplishments since the original plan.
Hi, and I'll just reintroduce myself. Again, I'm Lauren Ferris, with Principal Preservation Planner with the Historic Preservation Program. So before we could begin to develop our plan for the next decade, we needed to better understand what we did well and what were our accomplishments. So the original plan from 2006 had 3 goals: to enhance the understanding of Arlington's history and historic character, to better integrate preservation values into county planning, land use, and other policies and practices, and to protect historic neighborhoods, corridors, commercial centers, and civic buildings. There have been many ways we have accomplished these 3 goals. One of our most visible accomplishments was the installation of more than 45 historic markers. One you may know of that's nearby here is the Clarendon War Memorial. We conducted historic research and developed publications focusing on Arlington heritage, such as the Vietnamese and African American heritage. Our countywide architectural survey resulted in the documentation of more than 19,000 historic buildings, which helped contribute to historic neighborhoods and individual buildings to be listed on the National Register for Historic Places. Some of you may have heard of our Historic Resources Inventory, the HRI. This was one of our major goals of the original plan that was adopted by the County Board in 2011. Cynthia will be talking about that in a couple slides from here. We updated the historic preservation sections of the Arlington County zoning ordinance, ranging from a major revision in 2009 and more clarification efforts occurring in 2016 and 2017 towards the local historic district designation process. Some other big wins involved the designation of 13 local historic districts, the recreation of 10 historic preservation easements, both of which are some of our strongest tools to protect the county's tangible history. These are just some of our accomplishments that helped us incorporate preservation more holistically into major planning studies and initiatives and helped us build our internal work.
So as part of the planning process, we also did a hard look at what did not get accomplished after the original plan and why. So an ongoing challenge for us has been a lack of sufficient programmatic resources, both in terms of funding for our program to undertake major projects, as well as our small team's bandwidth to undertake additional work items. In recent years especially, there have been emergent issues that have arisen that required our immediate attention and often longer-term shifts away from other programmatic priorities. And as a result of that, we even had to take a multi-month hiatus from this planning process. Examples of such unexpected projects included some contentious requests for local historic districts, major commemorative activities, and the creation of a brand new grant funding program, among a few others. Our staff has been in a continual reactive state rather than focusing on proactive work. Often our objectives around outreach and education fell to the bottom of our to-do list since they lack specific timeframes and were not regulatory functions of our program. Our planning efforts to date also studied how historic preservation is integrated with other county policies, processes, and priorities. In fact, through our planning process, we learned this has been done inconsistently and sometimes even intermittently. There also is a varied understanding of how historic preservation operates in theory and in real practice, depending on the audience involved. All this reflection allowed us to determine both new opportunities and areas for improvement, many of which are addressed by the updated plans, goals, and recommendations.
So something we're very proud of in our approach to equity and accessibility is the fact that it's all throughout in this plan. We were fortunate that our process to update the plan began around the same time the county board adopted an equity resolution in September 2019 that identifies racial equity as a countywide priority. This formal commitment to enhance equity and access for all residents helped guide this plan, which provides recommendations to preserve and interpret an inclusive collection of histories and resources for future generations. We also wanted this plan to acknowledge that many county communities have seen changes and alterations that traditional preservationists may view as unworthy of protection. The Historic Preservation Program recognizes that the built environment alone does not serve as a comprehensive expression of community. We developed equity aspirations for each goal statement in the plan, describing how these achievements could advance inclusion, diversity, equity, and/or accessibility. The county also considered how we use language in the plan. We wanted language that is inclusive and enables all residents to see themselves in this plan, that it puts people and their identities first, and that demonstrates everyone who lives in Arlington is part of its history. A major shift in terms of the use of language is even in the title of this document. The original plan was the Historic Preservation Master Plan. As the term master is in this context refers to a feature that is superior or directive. And we saw this as problematic language. Both CPHD leadership and county leadership have been fully supportive of introducing a new title to our plan. The title of the Historic and Cultural Resources Plan, we feel, is more inclusive and more fully captures the breadth of our program.
So there are 5 main focus areas in the draft plan. So we're going to briefly walk through each and explain the related goals and objectives, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions. The focus area of community engagement has 2 main goals, which are really fundamental. First, to increase understanding of and support for Arlington's history in general, as well as its people and its places. We will aim to do this by celebrating diversity of people and place and conducting more targeted, proactive outreach. Recommendations to increase community engagement efforts include hosting 1 outreach effort on a quarterly basis, creating an annual report to track preservation successes and losses, and expanding our program's digital newsletter. We also are motivated to connect with areas and communities that typically have not participated in our historic preservation activities or services.
So the focus area of incentives has 1 main goal, simply to provide more incentives to more people to encourage more historic preservation. Residents, property owners, and developers are asking for clear benefits to do historic preservation because the rewards for redevelopment are quite high. Our historic preservation program wants to create incentives that could be financial benefits or tangible benefits like streamlining permitting and zoning for preservation activities. We want to recognize those already preserving Arlington's heritage through local historic districts, preservation easements with historic markers, plaques, and awards. Financial incentives could include growing the historic preservation fund, possibly through an endowment of county funds and/or ongoing dedicated revenue sources. We want to explore providing other financial tools like establishing a local tax abatement program. We'd like to offer flexible zoning standards for historic buildings undergoing rehabilitation or adaptive reuse. I would love to establish a menu of county-provided benefits available to owners of LHDs and easement historic properties, or even for historic properties under site plan or development review. Having financial incentives like these could balance change by incentivizing preservation methods as part of development and redevelopment.
So our next focus area is partnerships. And with this, we have three main goals. Firstly, we want to better define how historic preservation is included in other county planning efforts and reviews. This will require us to develop proactive, constructive, and consistent partnerships with other county functions. For consistency, it also will be important to include historic preservation as a standard component of all sector plans, area plans, long-range plans, and county-wide planning studies. The second partnership goal includes integrating historic preservation with priority county-wide initiatives. To do so, we need to strengthen our existing partnership between affordable housing and historic preservation. We need to provide better technical support for retrofitting historic properties for improved energy efficiency. And we also need to better support the role of trees, vegetation, and landscape design in our historic neighborhoods and landscapes. Lastly, our third partnership goal involves addressing cultural landscapes in the county. Historic cemeteries and burial grounds are a good example of an ongoing area of concern regarding cultural landscapes. We need to consider developing recommendations for ongoing maintenance of these sites and development issues at both cemeteries and burial grounds. We also need to increase our partnerships to better understand, interpret, and preserve the physical historic resources and cultural meaning of county parks and other county public spaces.
So a key area the plan focuses on is regulation, and we do this in 4 important goals. Over the years, the local historic district designation process has protected many significant historic properties. But recently, there have been a few high-profile designation requests that could not be completed before, unfortunately, the historic properties were demolished. Furthermore, in Virginia, as a jurisdiction, the legal structure for designation process enables only advisory roles for the appointed Preservation Commission members, which in Arlington is the HLRB, and then placing the final designation decisions with the elected officials. The legal structure can result in differences of opinion between the county board and the HLRB. Our first regulation goal is to assess and improve the LHD designation process, strengthening the alignment between the HLRB recommendations and county board decisions. Further, we think it is important to ensure that designation decisions utilize the legal requirements included in the state enabling legislation or Arlington County zoning ordinance. We find that there is consensus from leadership and the community to refine the designation process. It may be an option to seek legislative changes at the state level to align the LHD designation process with national benchmarks. Our second regulation goal is to protect historic places with meaning beyond architecture and places that are neither a single building nor a complete large neighborhood, but rather an in-between size. Another option could be establishing micro districts, which would be modestly sized LHDs. We find that the Maywoods of Arlington probably not going to happen too often. So we're hoping to see instead of whole neighborhoods, that we might be able to designate small areas as local historic districts. Maybe it's just streets, just chunks of neighborhoods that could receive designation, and maybe they would have a trickling effect to protect larger sections. We want to study the creation of a new tool like the neighborhood heritage district. This would focus more on scale, maybe the rhythm or layout of the building, maybe broad materials and other features. A third goal is to seek preservation for high risk and underrepresented historic and cultural resources and landscapes. We could prioritize the application of historic preservation tools to the highest risk and least protected resources, such as culturally significant historic properties or archaeological resources. Speaking of archaeological resources, our fourth goal is to establish an archaeology program for Arlington County. This would include developing and adopting an archaeological ordinance, an archaeology plan, and developing an archaeological review process for projects on county property.
Okay. And lastly, the focus area for technology, information, and tools has two main goals. One for the Historic Resources Inventory, or the HRI, and the other regarding our historic preservation systems in general. So the HRI has been used as a planning tool now for more than a decade by staff, by county leadership, as well as property owners. And in this use, we acknowledge the need to expand and improve the usability of the HRI. And we hope to accomplish this in several ways. First, we see the need to make corrections to the first phase of the HRI, which, as you might know, include historic garden apartments, commercial buildings, as well as shopping centers. Edits are needed to clarify property names, addresses, and construction dates. Some properties have even been protected through easements, while others, unfortunately, have been demolished. So a general cleanup of the content in the existing list is desperately needed. Ultimately, the detailed property information needs to be as accurate and current as possible to really strengthen the HRI as a useful tool. The HRI likewise would benefit from having clearer policy requirements for HRI ranked properties. Although the county board adopted goals and policy objectives for the HRI in 2011, how those have been applied has varied over the past decade plus. The HRI would have more credibility as a planning tool if the different ranking categories could be better defined, and if there are clearer expectations as to what preservation treatments are most appropriate for the specific categories. In essence, the HRI really has been one of the most effective ways that the county has been able to achieve historic preservation since adoption of our original plan in 2006. And we've really been able to do this particularly through the site plan review process as well as major planning studies. But we recognize there is still room for improvement. So speaking of improvement, we also need to think through how others are able to access the HRI as a tool. We want to be able to provide GIS mapping connectivity so more county staff outside of just the preservation program could easily use it. Consideration also should be given as to how the information in the HRI could be made more accessible to the general public as an educational tool about the county's varied architectural history. Lastly, there is a need to consider expanding the HRI into a second phase. There are buildings that have now come of age since the approval of the initial list in 2011, and so those would need to be surveyed and ranked. There are even some historic buildings that were inadvertently omitted from the original survey, so those should be captured. The 3108 Bank Building being one of those. Consideration also should be given to studying new historic resource types for inclusion, such as county-owned buildings, modern architecture, and institutional buildings like community centers, schools, and churches. The HRI likewise could be improved by expanding its focus to include cultural importance, not just architectural merit. So the last goal we'll discuss this evening deals with the need to improve and expand the county's historic preservation information systems in general. Our program can be both strengthened or limited by how effectively we share and convey our information, both internally across county departments as well as to the public. There are opportunities to expand our existing data as well as manage it better. Recommendations to expand our information would involve conducting additional architectural and cultural surveys and studies, particularly for underrepresented stories and those places and people previously not studied in depth. It is also important that our program complete an ongoing heritage survey of African American historic resources countywide, not only to formally document that important history, but to potentially recognize and or protect associated historic places. In terms of managing our data better, we should explore improving how we share information about Arlington history and its physical records. Making our information more user-friendly and available to the public for research is a start, and we should consider digitization efforts, data tagging, and making more information GIS accessible. The plan also recommends a more formalized approach to managing historic resources countywide, including establishing an archival records program within the historic preservation program. We also need to begin to study ongoing risks to historic properties, such as increasing climate change and development pressures, then incorporate this information into our existing information systems.
That's the bulk of our presentation. We're ready to take any questions from you all.
Very good. Good. It's now with the committee. And I will take chair's prerogative. I had a couple of small things. I went through the project. I quickly went through the draft. First one was great. I'm really very, very happy to see how you pulled it through the history of the county all the way through that. And it's like the history back to like Ice Age. I mean, that's great. You know, that's I think that's really well documented. Small things. Lee Highway is now Langston. All the way through it, you're using Lee Highway. When you're giving addresses for things on the list and in the appendices toward the back.
Yeah, I believe the main section you're probably referring to is within the HRI listing. And that has not been updated, but we will make note of that for the next version.
Thank you.
You have to resist the extrovert tendency of that.
Yes.
Right. The historic eras, when you have dates on it, they're not consistent. They're off by a year or two when you use it in different places. But the colonial period, the federal period, make sure those dates, that when you have those dates, they're consistent all the way through. Where you're listing, in one of the tables where the cinema draft house is listed, it has it in Clarendon. It's being protected by Clarendon rather than the form-based code. When all the way through it, actually, in a lot of things you're using, like for example, this is now being now this is it, or today it is. Don't use now or today. This, when you put this in final, it'll probably be in final like for 10 years before it gets redone again. Things are changing so rapidly in this county that you have a picture of something, it may not be here 2 years from now. So use, this is as of the date such and such, or as of the publication of this, rather than just using the word today, because today is today, it's not yesterday or the day before. So once you've published it, it's no longer today. I would love to see you using maps more than when you're talking about neighborhoods. Maybe the first time have the county with highlighted where in the county that neighborhood is. There are so many neighborhoods that I'm still not sure where some of our neighborhoods are. So it helps anchor. Oh, this is where it is in the county. That's where it is in the county. I'd love to see more maps. Like for example, we used to have trolley lines here. I don't think anybody knows where those trolley lines actually went. Yet they were really key to how our neighborhoods grew and why they grew. I'd love to see a map of what the trolley lines were, because that really helped direct our growth. When you say that when Metro Rail came through, or when roads came through, that's where a lot of growth went after the trolleys and everything. But you include I-66 in that, there was no development by when I-66, that was built so late that I don't think there's really any development that you can attribute to 66 going through. Definitely Richmond Highway going through, and Shirley Highway going through, Arlington Boulevard going through. They definitely spurred growth. I'm not sure 66 ever did. So look at that more closely. Pictures, label the pictures better. Like the slide you had before this one, it had 2 pictures. And I think I knew where one of those things was, but I have no idea where the other is. There's a number of pictures and they're all, of course, Arlington. It'd be great to say, this is where it is. Because you can go and see it. I know where the Weenie Beanie is, but.
Everyone knows where the
Right, where the Weenie Beanie is, but the picture below it, where is that? Is that Crystal City?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we should label where things are. Because these are great illustrations, but I want them anchored in our county. I think that really helps sell it. Anyway, those are little nits that I have. I'll hold off on larger things later because I'd like my fellow commissioners to jump in here because I'm sure they have lots of things they want to say, including those online. Looking at you, Commissioner Steinberger, a former member of ALRB. Anyway, I throw it out to the floor. Any further comments?
I have comments.
Yeah, Commissioner Garrett, please.
Thank you for meeting with us earlier. So David Howell, Caroline Haynes, and I met with Ms. Lisa Stars and Ms. Ferris to review this. Again, as planner, I think this is a beautiful plan and quite an improvement from the old one. And it's really impressive to update something that's almost 20 years old. Thank you for adding in the references to nature and biophilia, given that that's another really important initiative that the county adopted around the same time as the equity one. There's so many things I think are really strong about this plan. I agree with the maps. I think that's going to be really helpful and illustrative, especially for the neighborhoods. People refer to it by neighborhood, and yet if you don't live in that neighborhood, you don't know where that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about these new local historic districts and new historic preservation easements. This, you know, has come up at times when there are communities that want to find a way to say what they think is special about their neighborhood, and that gets some pushback. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I really commend you for trying to integrate this with the other comp plan priorities, because I think that's something that is missed a lot. We're seeing a lot of these plans get updated recently, and that's pretty critical. Ditto with the partnerships and the coordination with the other plans, with the references to the trees. You know, they're updating the forestry and natural resource management plan, and so on. So it would be nice to see that tied together. And I think it's just really brilliant to highlight the cultural landscapes as well. You know, this classic tension of planning people or place. And this really does call out people. I think also doing that and the meaning of the parks and the public spaces gets at something that sometimes gets criticized about Arlington. And that is like, where's there and the placemaking and keeping the historical references. And I think you've sort of created, with updating the plan, that conversation, this new space where we can start having that conversation. Like Leo's point about what, you know, with this building, is there a way to save part of it, the shell, the facade, and reference what was there, because we are very good at letting people come in and keep redeveloping and getting a little bit more out of their site. We want to be responsive to the demand to be here, but you guys are, you know, I you know how much I really think this is a great plan, and it's great the way you've outlined this as a way to sort of acknowledge all of that, but sort of be representative of where we are. With regard to things like making the HRI updated GIS mapping, as a professor, I just have to say, do you ever think about taking interns for this? I think that there are a lot of students who would love to get a couple of months experience working with professionals. And if they had a discrete task like that, they could do it. And then my last question, the house, when you had the slide up for plan accomplishments with the angel on it and the glass block, I know exactly where that is. What is that house? What was the background on that house? It's across from the Darth Vader house.
Darth Vader.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
I think you need to elaborate on what
Yeah.
the Darth Vader.
Do you know the house I'm talking about? It's on your slide that says plan.
I know which one
accomplishments.
I know which one.
I know it's on the accomplishment slide. That's one of the streamlined modern houses. So
Okay.
we did a National Register nomination.
It's the Darth Vader house.
Decade
Is
ago.
it like a modern?
It's the
dark?
modern
Okay.
dark house on the opposite side of the street, and it backs up to the park. And well,
Now we need to go look at that.
okay, so how do you get to this house?
We can talk about it after.
North on Military, turn right just past the park for
But that's my point, why we want
Yes.
these later.
So I'd love to know, because I looked at it without the background,
Fair
without
enough.
having Leo next to me saying, oh, this is beautiful example of, yeah. So
Okay.
I'm intrigued to see that there, and we all, you know, that street with the Darth Vader house and then that house.
That would actually be a very funny.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank
So
you.
use the photos as teaching moments. Got it. Okay.
Oh, absolutely, time to our history, thank you.
I'll third the maps. I think maps, you know, you can never go wrong with maps. And I think that's an interesting point, you know, educating ourselves and sort of reminding ourselves and our neighbors about the different neighborhoods. You know, I think a lot of times we become familiar with certain corners of the county. So, you know, to have like a map that starts to delineate these neighborhoods would be helpful. And, you know, that way it also makes it easier for you to read, document, and understand, you know, the different neighborhoods that we're talking about. I think strongly support this notion of zoning and preservation and how those two overlap. You know, I think that's a critical low-hanging fruit that we can really capitalize on. We had this conversation, the housing we had last year and earlier this spring, you know, and how there's a lot of possibilities there that I think really makes sense, you know, when you're just both preserving and creating opportunities for development. The building we spoke earlier on in the meeting. I wonder if there's something that we can do or we can strategize on, I think now between staff departments and having that communication. I feel that that's one of the problems that we have as a community. And I don't know that planning commission has much of a say on it, but I've just encountered that problem, you know, and I think tonight we saw that problem. when we're talking about bus shelters, we run into that problem. And I think, the left hand and the right hand, I don't know if you guys have any ideas or any recommendation for us to talk to the board or talk about planning commission or talk about zoning to create something that starts to have departments talk to each other, about it. I think sort of almost a sidebar, but I think it's something that's almost universal also, and probably something we ought to repeat at every meeting, to encourage staff to talk to each other. But I think, yeah, I'm really excited that this plan's being updated. Excited about the idea. I have to confess, I haven't read it quite to the extent that I would like to. But I think to congratulate you on the graphic design, it's really sort of nice, restrained, but yet sort of playful and colorful at the same time. So it's really good. I don't know if you guys are, who you hired to do this or if you're doing it in-house. But I think, yeah, and I will second Commissioner Lantelmi's sort of tagging and over describing things. You just have to assume the people that are reading this don't know what they're looking at. So good captions are always good. But yes, thank you.
Thank you. Getting into the big things, I have a couple comments also on that. One thing we've been frustrated with on planning commission when projects come before us, which have a component, is that the HRA came often after some of these projects were conceptualized, so we really couldn't do much about it. I'm thinking about, for example, the gas station, in
Joyce
Clarendon.
Motors.
Yeah, Joyce Motors. I would have loved to have had more tools to offer that developer. Say, in order to preserve this in situ, you can get extra height here. You can get a TDR. I mean, there's a whole lot of things. There's more than just TDRs. There's lots of tools that we can potentially use. And I don't think we're doing that. I really think we need to explore way, way more, give way more flexibility if we're serious about really preserving things. Because our properties are so valuable now that it's really unfair to property owners to put a constraint on them that they don't get somehow compensated for. And if we want them to actually happen, and the county board, they're elected, they have the right and the responsibility to sometimes overrule us. Planning commission, that happens to us because they have larger considerations. You're going to be the same way. They're going to sometimes overrule. You want to give enough tools that they rarely do that there is an accommodation that developer comes before and says, yeah, I'm on board with this. So we need to find as many tools as possible in order to allow this to happen. So that's just a larger philosophical thing. I know you're all considering, but it really has to be a big part of this, certainly going forward. The other thing I want to be careful about is capture of historic preservation by those who are already privileged. I think it's great the way we have so often, you're weaving through equity on this. And that's really, really important because too often historic preservation is hijacked by the haves to prevent anything from changing. It's the way our neighborhood's going to be. We're going to preserve it as it is in amber. And that it's done as a way to exclude others. And I really want to be careful that we don't end up somehow going down that path and ending up that happening. For example, one thing we're using the term in this neighborhood character, which we all do, but I'd like to have that be modified to say physical neighborhood character or neighborhood's physical character, because too often it ends up being a way of people. It's like not our kind of people here. Neighborhood character means something more than just what the house looks like. It ends up who's living there.
More than the architecture.
Yeah, right. And I want to really be careful that when we're talking about neighborhood character in this context, because you're clearly doing that, it's the physical look of the neighborhood. I get that. But we have to be careful that, because that has been coming up. We've seen that before us on planning commission. People using neighborhood character as anyway, I won't get into it. But
Yeah, I want to second that. That ends up being like a red flag for us when
Right.
people come in and they do that. You're right. That is a good catch, Jim. And I second a lot of this with the tools for developers, but also for us. If you can help us think about how to have a more full discussion when there's a question about preservation, because I think a lot of us just don't know this very well. Like we don't know architecture very well, so that we can spend a little time debating that. That's a great idea. And I want to call out when you said the hijack by privilege. I I'd like to hear a little bit more about your African American Heritage Survey. One of my concerns with missing middle is I think our most affordable neighborhoods where we might see this might be some of our African American homeownership neighborhoods. So I'd love to know, could this potentially be a way to bring some tools to some of those communities so that they're not immediately susceptible? Yeah.
The other thing I want to be careful, and there's a big example of this. This probably ties into the hijack by privilege. This has happened in DC. And I want to make sure we don't have that happen here, because as you rightly recognize in this, there's a lot of competing things. We want to make sure that historic preservation is lined up with affordable housing, sustainability, and all the other goals that we have in our comprehensive plan, because it's a comprehensive plan. It's a comprehensive plan. This is just one element of it. So there's a lot of competing things here. We want to bring them in alignment as much as possible. But there was a big battle in DC on one of their equivalent of Maywoods, their historic, that someone wanted to put solar panels. Because you theoretically could see it from the street, it was killed. And that's totally contrary to everything we're trying to do. And solar panels come and go. I mean, currently they may be seen, but in 20 years, the technology will move forward and may not be. You can take them off.
We do allow them in Maywood.
Right, which is the way it should
And
be.
other districts.
But that battle in DC was like, I'm going, oh my God, how to kill support for historic preservation. That's exactly what we don't want to have happen, is that people are trying to do the right thing, something that everybody knows needs to be done. We're saying, oh, nope, you can't do it because it doesn't look like it's the 1890s. Let's be really, really careful about that sort of, because again, this is with the neighborhood saying, oh no, it doesn't look right, and like we're going to be careful about that sort of. So anyway, I'm throwing that as more of a philosophical point to keep in mind in this going forward with this. But anyway, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, if I may. Well, first I want to say thank you for having this be so comprehensive. You mentioned that you want people to be able to see themselves in this plan and for it to be equitable. Well, funny enough, just in your executive summary, you're talking about the Salvadorian community. My background is from El Salvador, so I immediately sort of identified with that. So I want to thank you for that. I know you mentioned doing walking tours of Saigon, Little Saigon, for example, and sort of thinking beyond structures. And I'm wondering, how do you guys plan to do this sort of living history? For example, the Salvadorian community is sort of vibrant, but it's sort of a newer, after the Civil War, that's when a lot of irregular migration and gangs and everything, they started coming here. How do you guys plan to demonstrate that in sort of the historical lens, I suppose? Because I know you mentioned them here, but I'm wondering, and perhaps that leads to something larger that I was thinking, it would be great. I know you guys provide past examples like what you guys did in Green Valley, but it would be great to see the art of the possible with like an actual case study of a community. Let's say for El Salvador. Right now you name you just named the Salvadorian community, but what about with one of the programs that you're envisioning? How would that look like? What would be the art of the possible, and what effects would that have for us in considering those options? That's all.
The Vietnamese, did you guys work with that, with the public art?
No, Little Saigon.
Yeah, the Little Saigon.
Yes, that was a joint project with the Historic Preservation Program, the Center for Local History, and Arlington Cultural Affairs. So we applied for a grant from, at the time, Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, now sponsored that publication. That was
So that's a good
2015.
example where it's like this cross-pollination. It was really.
We need to do more cross-pollination.
Which goes back to your initial point.
Well, so you all kind of give us a flurry of questions. So I'm going to try and see how we can answer some. And I'm going to go with the most recent. And I think when talking about living history, I think go to this one.
So we've been wanting to do a lot more surveys and we've been wanting to be able to start kind of really having, because I could even say we have a lot of surveys that we've done that talks about the architectural history and the history of different populations that have lived in Arlington County, and we haven't been able to really do as much outreach as we would like. And even if that's just doing something very traditional where it's having more publications, is something that we'd like to do more of. And I think also with partnerships, there's definitely other divisions within Arlington County where this is definitely their goal, and we have been able to work well with them. We want to do it. We also want to do it formally in our plan and their plan. I think we have learned to put ourselves in with other divisions. I think of like the Center for Local History. I think of Cultural Affairs. I think of Public Art. We've even Urban Design. We've been really trying to always be around when there's certain projects that they're doing. If we don't formalize that, and Cynthia and I move on from Arlington County, if that ever happens, you know, I don't know if people who are going to spots are going to do that if it's not formally there. So that's one thing, improving our partnerships is a way that we can do that. But I think of with, you can see here, we have an illustration of a green review, and we just partnered with a private architectural firm to do some architectural surveys of the LGBTQ community. And this again is just an area where it is trying to make sure that we're trying to identify as many people as possible and trying to find the story. And I think the more we do that and the more we're able to have the resources that we need to find the creative ways that people kind of internal, like how we all digest this information. It's not always going to be with a marker. It's not always going to be with a book, but it could be something where we're working more with community events and programming that works with audiences that are there. Because I think we are very niche. I think, as you were saying, Commissioner Guerin, that not everybody knows about preservation and all of its tools. And so we're hoping that we will just continue to be able to do our outreach out there so that people know what is available to them and just part of the program. I also think that we are trying to be as forward-thinking with the way that people can digest this information. I think with our story maps, that's one way that we're trying to do that. We're trying to work well with the AV team with Arlington County to create more digital projects, more YouTube videos, those types of things to kind of like get the information out there. Because we even found that with some of the materials that we've put out there in the past 3 years about this plan and is developing it. Again, not everybody is going to look at a flyer. Not everyone's going to read the whole document from page to page. I don't want people to do that if they don't want to do it, but maybe if they digest that information in a different way, we think that we'll get our messaging out there more. And so I think when we were talking about our technology information tools, working more with GIS, but also we're able to do more training, our program to be able to do that more, increase our partnerships again. We're hoping to be able to get our messaging out there more. So you had a question,
Yes,
Commissioner Guerin, about the African American Heritage Survey. I think I can answer that one. So that was a project that our program embarked on, I'm embarrassed to admit, a few years ago. We used some of our consultant money to hire a firm to basically prepare our historic context. They did an architectural survey of several dozen historic buildings and neighborhoods associated with African American culture and history in the county, and they prepared a draft report. And this is one of those things that, unfortunately, because of other pressing priorities and because of staff turnover and more pressing priorities that came up, that this kind of has stalled. And so the end goal really was twofold. One was to be able to document the importance of these places while they were still standing. And then two, and share that information with the public and property owners, of course. And then two, to be able to then make preservation tools accessible to these neighborhoods. And so thinking of places along Langston Boulevard, thinking of historically African-American neighborhoods that are experiencing a lot of change at a very rapid rate, but that have cultural significance. And how do we then work with owners who are willing to then start nominating those properties to the National Register. So, and then in turn, those owners could take advantage of tax credits that they otherwise would not have access to right now in terms of doing renovation work. Maybe making, getting tax credits and doing a renovation is the solution to preventing some tear downs in some of these rapidly changing neighborhoods. So we realized that that's a very important project. It had been stalled, unfortunately, for a host of reasons, but we do realize the need to get that started again and get that completed so we can make those tools available to more Arlingtonians.
I definitely would support that. I think you'd get the whole PC behind it. And Jimmy, you might remember this, Mr. Chair. I think having something like this would have been enormously helpful when the hospital was redeveloping, and they really didn't have a sense of the strong community that was already there.
So many.
Yeah.
Really.
And we were hearing things,
Unsatisfied.
there used to be a tree lot on the corner, and we think, oh, there's so much here that's just begging to be built into your design. But as you say, that not all the developers have the tools for that. It's a hospital, after all, that's not their expertise. And then I don't think a lot of that history had been daylighted and shared. So that'll be really helpful.
And I think a lot of the focus of the original plan and the original statement of significance that was part of that original plan really was focused on architecture. Documenting, did that countywide survey. Everyone knows what a garden apartment is, I think now, because of the education around that. But how our program and how the preservation field has evolved since that time of the original plan, it's more about people and places and connections, not just those physical buildings. And so how do we then celebrate the culture and the traditions and the heritage behind these places too? And so that is a big focus of the updated plan.
Yeah, you have one big example in there, but I could think of others like, Mr. Moore's barbershop. He's an institution, his father, now him. But because it's a person and it's what happens there, when he decides to retire or passes on, it can change, it will change. Because it's what happened in there, the next use won't have anything to do with it, won't relate. We still need to memorialize that in some way, but the building itself isn't it. It was what was happening in the building that was important, and him and his father. I mean, they were the cultural value of it. It's same down on 23rd Street. Freddie's Bar. It's the only gay bar in Northern Virginia, probably. When Freddie decides to move on, it'll be a Thai restaurant, let's say, or something. How do we memorialize what Freddie meant to that community here? So that it's remembered, and because it's what went on in there. It wasn't building itself, which is totally, who cares? So we have a number of those through the county, and it's going to be a struggle. And I don't have the answer. That's why you're the professional, so you're going to have to figure that out. But
well, please spend some time on the project webpage for the plan update. We have, as Lauren was mentioning, we have the plan. If you would like to read it cover to cover, it's there in all its glory for you. But we also have a quick video summary. We have technical memos that our consultant had prepared throughout the process. So there's other ways to understand the information, including what we're calling our cultural spotlight videos. And you might have seen it. We did the first one. I'm trying to think when we released it. The end of 2021. It's all kind of blurred together. But we did one. The first one was about Freddie's. We have another one being released this week about a building that has already been named in this meeting this evening. So you'll have to wait till Friday so you can watch it for yourselves. But bringing those stories to life and those connections to the people, not just the places.
And I also wanted to kind of bring up, I really did appreciate mentioning the hijack by privilege. And I think that, I think that there have been a lot of studies that have been happening that have really been challenging for everybody to embrace. And we want to make sure that we have those flexible tools so that communities can have options, but it can work well with not just our preservation goals, but goals of other divisions. I think of Missing Middle. I think that Missing Middle is a perfect example. There's definitely ways to do missing middle and historic preservation. Missing middle wanted to come to some of our well-known local historic districts. It can happen and it can be done well. And I think that, you know, there is maybe a concern that by having more designation tools that are more flexible, they're going to be everywhere. I think that's going to happen. I think that it's going to be appropriate in certain neighborhoods. I think that 23rd Restaurant Road, 23rd Street, and where Freddie's Bar is, I think that's a great example of where if we were to focus on the story of that commercial district, it isn't just about the buildings, it's about the legacy businesses, and the people who go there, and the community that uses it. And there might be some appropriate places where we do the tangible history and the traditional preservation, but really it could be wanting to focus more on what was here, what is here now, a living history. I think that that's a great way to describe it. And it really will, we hope, will have people kind of feel more connected with their community. I also think it would reach, it wouldn't just reach people who are living in that neighborhood, it could be people who are working there. And I think that, you know, it's definitely allowing people to feel more included in what the story is. I also was thinking about the HRI and some of the things that were mentioned about that. And, you know, again, we're not, we already had some people who were concerned, like what are there any buildings identified in this plan that could be decided, are any of them my property to actually worry? We recognize the level of energy that's going to happen with improving the HRI, making some corrections, expanding it, and we want to give that amount of time that's really needed towards that. And that's going to be hopefully one of our first things that we're going to do after this plan gets adopted. So, and I think of how we were looking at this property here at Columbia Pike, that would be a perfect example of a property that could have been reviewed if the HRI were to be. And then lastly, I just want to kind of go back to the incentives aspect. You know, our major incentive goal was this historic preservation fund. And we were so fortunate the county board has already approved this, donated funds to it, allocated funds, thank you, to it. And we really wanted to make sure that as many people as possible could get access to this. And, you know, we're going to hopefully improve that every year, find new ways to grow that. And that is one small way that we can try and make preservation be more, more looked upon as a benefit for everybody. And I think that there's going to be some really great opportunities. And I think that Arlington County should feel really proud because I have not seen that many local jurisdictions do something. So, so I think that that can really be something that we can build, similar to what we are hoping to do with the HRI.
Well, I thought of another tool. I forgot to mention earlier that you can somehow think or consider. It's been used very successfully in other jurisdictions. For certainly any building built before World War II, if it did require parking to build that, don't require parking now. Parking minimums kill historic preservation. Los Angeles, where it's downtown, all those buildings were built in like the teens, 20s, 30s. When they eliminated parking requirements, they gained like 60,000 parking in buildings that were converted from office to, you know, old buildings that were adaptively reused. And it was only because they eliminated any parking requirements, because none of those buildings obviously had garages in them. And it was wildly successful. So that's something we should be considering about here, you know, at least at minimum, no more parking than what they were built with. You know, that is a real friend to historic preservation, especially for older buildings, pre-war. A couple of other small things that are pulled after we were talking. Your history of Crystal City. Crystal City was planned and construction certainly way on the way before Metro was conceived. It was not a Metro. Yeah, Metro Rail was not a spur to Crystal City. That came independent of Richmond Highway more likely, but it was really more because of the Pentagon. And you do refer to the bullseye approach, which it was, definitely planning, that was the original plan. Be aware that planning commission, and I think Anthony's looking at revisiting the bullseye approach in the corridor. We're certainly advocating, at least some of us are advocating for a spine approach rather than bullseye.
People are willing to walk further than they used to be.
Right. Again, those are just right out there.
Any questions that we didn't address?
I am curious about historic districts.
So the new tools or districts that have been approved?
Yeah.
Some of those, didn't we have one like house up far by Chain Bridge that became its own little district?
Yes, St. Anderson House.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the most recent. Requested by the property
Yeah.
owner.
We did that,
We
right?
love that one.
Yeah,
We love that.
We did that.
We have some more in the works. We're gonna come see you again soon.
It's
hopefully
exciting
before the end
for
of the
us
year.
because it is new and different, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. We love that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do have over 12 easement holding properties, and I realize that we don't really champion their history as much.
Yeah.
A lot of them are located in Clarendon, commercial revitalization area. Some are kind of small cemeteries, and others are some of our local historic districts. Reeveland is a local historic district, but it also has an easement.
Glebe House.
Yes, I mean, Glebe House is one of them. I mean, we have a great kind of portfolio, and we are hoping that like things like improving our mapping tool,
Yeah.
kind of figuring out more ways to do outreach, we can highlight those more, as well as I think a lot of people are familiar with, again, local historic districts versus a property that owns, that has an easement on it, the differences and levels of protections. So we aren't sure how to do it just yet, but I think if we just continue to keep reaching out to all the different communities, different populations, every way possible, we can just continue to explain what those are and what are the benefits of them. Even some of our members on the HLRB are still trying to get familiar with some of the approaches that we're doing, such as using TDRs and how that sometimes then creates an easy holding property. We just have to keep trying to improve. And we look at our neighbors and our partners in this area, the Washington DC area, and how to do that. And so we're trying to learn the best ways to do it.
So just to make sure I heard you right, I was excited about that in between, I think. you called it.
Micro district.
Yeah. Between
Yeah.
architecture and between neighborhood. And then I think that would be an interesting thing. 3 or 4 neighbors get together and say, this is the district. I think that's really exciting.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah.
Not yet, because we don't have that.
Okay.
But we do have examples of things that potentially could happen. I think that there's definitely a lot of people who are interested in the Lion Park neighborhood. That is a National Register of historic places, historic district, but that doesn't have any protections to it. And so I think that there are definitely some property owners who are interested in designating their properties and are hoping that that will kind of cause a trickling effect.
We have a couple ideas and we were recently approached within the past couple months by a couple who lives in Cherrydale. They live in a historic bungalow and they approached us about designation, but are trying to convince some of their neighbors on their block to do it with them. So that could potentially be a little micro district where we can honor kind of the bungalow form within a streetcar suburb without it being the entire neighborhood.
We lost the possibility of the Lustron neighborhood.
That's a sore subject for me. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That is sad.
Next question.
That was sad.
So I think it would definitely, to your point, Commissioner Sarli, would add a layer of flexibility that we don't have now. And being able to help preserve not only cultural heritage, but also places that might have undergone more changes over time. And being able to still recognize the importance of place without being a traditional historic Alexandria historic district, for example.
I have one more thing to raise. I almost hesitate to raise it because it's going to sound really awful probably, but then the very beginning where you go through the explanation of terminology. I thought it almost read more like virtue signaling. Because it's something I support and we should do, and it should just be as a matter of course, getting rid of the term master plan. That's an easy one. But going through the whole explanation of it seemed a little bit overkill. It just, I'm not sure it added anything because the whole document itself really speaks for itself that way. It's just the way it's written. It's like matter of fact that these terms we always use and we'll be using going forward. I'm not sure we need to call it out. It's just there. It's a fact. That's what we're doing it. And then that's just the way it's struck.
So we did have one last slide just to kind
Oh,
of
sure.
summarize
Yeah.
kind of next steps. So we would really encourage all of our LRPC members to read the plan if you haven't already. The link is in the slides. And we would encourage you also to fill out the feedback form. You have until June 20th to do that. It's about a dozen questions or so. And so we would love for you not only to complete that tonight or at your leisure before June 20th, but please share both the draft plan and the feedback form with others who you think might be interested. We are also planning to return to LRPC later this summer. I think we are targeting July, so we can talk about some of the changes that we have been making to the document based on this feedback that we're collecting now from the community. We are expecting to return to the HLRB the August, September timeframe as well. And then our goal is to return to the full planning commission as well as the county board for the RTA and then the adoption hearing. So you will have several more opportunities to engage with us, ask your questions.
And we have Commissioner Steinberger. Recognize you. Come off mute.
Hi, so I'm even going to try to go on camera, although that light placement is not desirable. Hi everyone, I really just wanted to add my 2 cents, and I apologize, I had to do baby duty a bit tonight, so I was in and out, but I was very heartened by much of what I heard with regards to making sure that our historic preservation, that those elements are something we can consider, every time we're considering a major planning document, whether it's a sector plan or something else, that baking that into our process from the beginning, I think is really what I've heard as being a desirable approach, since I was on HLRB, and I've heard that from various commissioners, over a period of years. So I'm heartened that that's the direction that, staff, the direction we're heading in. Also in terms of, I chuckled a little bit when I heard about the feedback in terms of having a plan for taking care of some of our historic cemeteries, because I know that's been something that we've that brought back memories of projects past. So I was pleased to hear that as well, and I just really wanted to say it was nice to see some familiar faces. Sorry I had to be home tonight, but good to see you guys. Bye.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm happy to see the cemeteries because that was a big part of the Washington Kirkwood Special Club study. All at least.
That's the one.
The one.
Yep.
Ding ding.
Yep. But also the little cemetery, which is in Boston, where the buildings go up around right now.
Still there.
Yeah, I know. That was my first plan.
That's another reason for full historic district. So
Just one up on Sycamore.
A lot of cemeteries.
That actually brings a point that I made at the Sunrise South development. There's a typology of churches, architectural typology of churches that I think are soon going to be an endangered species. As we keep, they're nice properties, they're zoned correctly, they're good, nice parking lots. So, I don't know if there's anything we ought to or can do. Again, talking to zoning and sort of doing, I know that some of the housing APA has developed or redeveloped the one in Columbia Pike, that was a significant structure, right? Again, a little bit of more creativity, where we preserve and develop. The Joyce Motor is a good example that Commissioner Montcalm, I think, brought up earlier on. It was really unimaginative, right? To move that stuff. there's no reason why that could have been the front desk, or that could have been the next carpool. You know, yeah, and it's a little bit of this like, you know, we just love to come in, bulldoze, and start from scratch, you know, and I know that that's your daily fight, you know, but I think anything that you can sort of educate us and help us talking points at these planning commissions and SPRCs even, really helpful to sort of preserve and provide guidance to developers.
I think that there is, thinking about the technology churches, we definitely see that maybe that could be an opportunity category if we were to expand the historic resources inventory. But I also, one of the things that's really come out of the Historic Preservation Fund, which we closed our applications at the end of April. We're now reviewing about 19 potential projects that we hope to fund after they get evaluated. And but one of the things that ended up happening during, so we had the Historic Preservation Fund open from January to the end of April, and we were taking questions. And we definitely had a lot of churches interested in the Historic Preservation Fund for capital fund. And we had put a requirement that if someone wants to use the capital fund, they need to be a local historic district or an easement property. And we did get some people who aren't those that wanted to have that be considered. Like, what does that mean? And it's gives us an opportunity to know that there are some churches that are interested in maybe doing preservation, but that tight turnaround from January to April, that's like a year conversation for a congregation to have. So this might be an opportunity for us to find ways to reach out to that type of community to see if preservation could be a possibility. How would it work for them? And because I agree, if those are properties that are at risk, probably mostly because they are large lots.
Yeah.
Right.
And
A great point.
yeah, and so we see that as those
Yeah.
are threatened areas. And, but we also recognize that that could be for many goals of that Arlington has to have. And so it's going to take a lot of coordinating, it's going to take a lot of communicating with our internal partners, see how creative we can get.
The churches have an extra twist because they are religious. There's First Amendment issues that are federal law. You can only do so much in zoning to restrict their uses. They see part of their mission is housing. Housing is also one of our goals too. So, you know, it's,
Yeah, voice was huge in missing middle.
right. I also think some churches which they're gonna be torn down, and I think it's probably better because of the time, like the St. Charles in Clarendon. If that redevelops, it's going to be a church that will actually be a civic building, which will have an actual focus. The way the current designs are at any rate, they'll have a focal point in Clarendon rather than the church now where you don't even know what the front door is. It's even though it is a 50s building, and I can see value on that, but it just doesn't make any sense the way it is now. You don't even know it's a church when you drive by it. Our Lady of Exxon in Roslyn, which is like totally bizarre.
One of the first site plans I ended up getting involved in.
Right, it's totally bizarre, but it's like, this is everybody knows it. Because it's one of those bizarre buildings in Arlington, or in the whole region.
Adventure World. Gas station church combo.
Right.
But there's definitely certain projects that, you know, if there is a way to do holistic traditional preservation, I mean, I'm always going to be in support of that. But there's going to need to be some flexible and creative approaches. I think that this Central United Methodist Church in Boston, I think that definitely is a good example of having affordable housing, having space for the congregation to be able to gather, as well as there being a local historic district with the burial ground, and also having public arts with the restoration of the Tiffany. Thank you. The Tiffany window that depicts Jesus Christ, as well as other windows from the church that
And I think
come down.
it worked in Clarendon too. Baptist church there has affordable housing above it, and the congregation still there, and the church still looks like a church.
Yes.
You know, it still is a focal point from looking from Highland Street into the neighborhood. The church is right there. It still looks like a church.
So I think to your point, though, in terms of you expand the HRI, what are some of those other typologies that we should be churches and other institutional buildings, community centers, schools? We need to know what we have so we can understand how to think creatively about the future. So we have to document them all.
I think having preservation in, like I think of Plan Langston Boulevard, the Plan Langston Boulevard study, done a really good job with starting from, you know, A to point C or whatever with surveying over 120 properties, identifying ones that have, we felt, the most significance, finding a preservation treatment so it's clear when a project comes through on site plan that we have an idea of what we are expecting for those properties. And some of those are traditional preservation and some of those aren't. Some of those are interpretation and finding a creative way to do that. And we think that there, because we can do that all, and sometimes it isn't just the building. Sometimes it is just the people. Sometimes it is the story. And we're trying to kind of move the preservation in Arlington in that direction. We feel like we're already doing it, but now this can be more formal.
Yeah, and I'd love to actually talk to you offline, Langston Boulevard. There's a number of things that I thought you actually missed. The Pike building. We wouldn't.
Oh, I know. What you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Those,
there's definitely enough. There are about 30 buildings that the community has told us about on Langston Boulevard study that wasn't included in our original survey. I'm not sure why. We can figure that out. So I think now that we know that
we can sit down.
Yeah.
Taking one hat off, the other one on.
Yeah.
You can sit down and
that sounds
go through that. Might be a useful exercise.
I agree.
Anyway, anything else? Commissioners online and here, do you have anything further to ask or contribute or editorialize about? Do we have any members of the public who want to make comments? Our speaker is
Jim.
Mr. Schulman. We'll get you up, and I'll get first. Let me get the timer up, and then it'll be your turn to speak. 2 minutes. Okay,
Yes.
timer's up. Are you there? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated the presentation. I strongly believe that historic preservation can integratively augment other county goals. I don't think it's it's a zero-sum game. And in most cases, historic preservation can benefit other goals. In fact, let me just say that that the sound quality is not great. So I don't know if I heard this correctly, but if I did, the fact that 3108 Columbia Pike, that bank building, was inadvertently omitted from the HRI should tell something to the long range planning process here, that maybe it shouldn't be demolished and that maybe it needs to be considered before moving forward to provide parking. Commissioner Lantelmi talks about parking minimums as being important to preservation. And so the last thing I would think that a planning commission would want to do is to tear down a building that might be beneficial historically to provide parking. That's the substance of what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing else anybody wants to raise or say, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
You. Mic off.
Thank you all.